That morning, my son was worried about cutting strawberries evenly for his lunchbox. So why did he suddenly ask what happens when adults leave the wrong key?
Last Tuesday started like every other good morning in our house. My son Eli was sitting at the kitchen counter in dinosaur pajamas, carefully cutting strawberries into perfect little squares because he said uneven pieces taste weird. I remember laughing while packing his lunch, thinking how hard he tried to do everything right. He's 9 years old, quiet, sensitive, the kind of kid who apologizes when somebody else bumps into him. And honestly, after a rough couple years, his elementary school finally felt like a safe place for him. His principal, Mrs. Hargrove, always talked about discipline and strong values, and most parents trusted her because the school looked so organized. But that morning, right before Eli got out of the car, he stopped and checked his backpack 3 different times. Then he looked at me and said something that didn't make sense until later. Mom, what happens if somebody blames you for something you didn't do? I remember turning down the radio and looking at him for a second, waiting for him to explain. But Eli just shrugged and stared out the window toward the school entrance like he already regretted asking. What do you mean? I asked. Nothing, he said quickly. Just kids were talking yesterday. The crossing guard waved cars forward while students hurried across the sidewalk with oversized backpacks bouncing against their shoulders. Everything outside looked completely normal. Parents sipping coffee, teachers smiling at the front gate, kids laughing before class started, and standing near the entrance was Principal Hargrove. Perfect posture, clipboard in hand, watching everybody. The thing about Mrs. Hargrove was that adults loved her because she made the school seem controlled. Test scores were up, hallways were quiet. Every school event ran exactly on schedule. She spoke at Tom meetings like someone who always knew the right answer before anybody else asked the question. But kids reacted to her differently. A few weeks earlier, Eli mentioned a boy getting embarrassed during assembly for forgetting homework too many times. At the time, I thought it sounded harsh, but not dangerous, just strict. Now, sitting in the drop off line, I noticed something I hadn't paid attention to before. Students got quieter when she walked past them, not respectful quiet, nervous quiet. Eli reached for the door handle, then stopped again. What if they don't believe you? He asked softly. Before I could answer, a car behind me honked. Mrs. Hargrove glanced toward us from the curb. Eli immediately opened the door and climbed out. And for some reason, while I watched him walk into school that morning, I had this sudden urge to call him back to the car. I didn't. Around noon, my phone buzzed with a voicemail from the school office. There's been an incident involving Eli Reed. Please contact us as soon as possible. Then, less than 10 seconds later, another notification appeared. A text message from a parent I barely knew. Attached was a photo. That was the moment I realized this wasn't some misunderstanding that would get cleared up with a quick apology. Something much worse had happened inside that school while adults stood there and allowed it. I took Eli out to the parking lot because he wouldn't speak in front of Mrs. Hargrove. Even sitting in the car beside me, he kept his eyes locked on his sneakers like he was afraid he'd get in trouble again if he said the wrong thing. Finally, in broken little pieces, he told me what happened. The missing money belonged to his friend Noah. $20 his mom had given him for the book fair. During lunch, Noah realized it was gone and started panicking. Another student immediately pointed at Eli and said he'd seen him near Noah's desk earlier that morning. That was it. No search, no questions, no proof. Mrs. Hargrove pulled Eli out of class before lunch ended and marched him into the cafeteria in front of everybody. According to Eli, she held up the cardboard sign and said, Sometimes public accountability helps children make better choices. Then she made him wear it for hours. He said kids stared at him while they ate. Some laughed, some whispered. One older student barked like a police dog every time Eli walked past. And the worst part? Halfway through all of this, Noah remembered he'd left the money inside his desk organizer. He even told a teacher he found it. But nobody took the sign off Eli.
They already knew the money was found, so why was my son still standing there, wearing that sign in front of everybody?
I went straight back inside the school and demanded an explanation. Mrs. Hargrove didn't look embarrassed. She looked irritated that I was questioning her authority. Children need consequences, she said flatly. Humiliation is sometimes the only thing they remember. Humiliation. She said it like it was educational. Then I learned something else. Quietly, while another staff member avoided eye contact beside her, Mrs. Hargrove admitted a parent had complained earlier that year about a similar punishment involving another student. And nothing happened. Because test scores were high, discipline reports were low, the school board loved her results. I remember standing there completely calm while she talked, which honestly scared even me. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten her. I just walked outside, sat in my car beside Eli, and made one phone call. That night, the cafeteria photos spread across local parent groups faster than I could keep up with. Messages poured into my phone from people I didn't even know. Then, close to midnight, I got one message that made my chest tighten. You need to know this wasn't the first time. Attached was another photo, another child, another cardboard sign. By the next morning, the story had spread across the entire town. Parents were reposting the cafeteria photo everywhere. Some were angry, some were horrified. Others kept asking the same question over and over: how could a school even allow this? But what shocked me most were the private messages. They started quietly at first. One parent saying their daughter had once been forced to stand during lunch because she forgot homework too many times. Another saying their son came home crying after being publicly called out during assembly. Then more messages came in, screenshots, emails, stories going back years. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Mrs. Hargrove had built an entire system around humiliation. Kids were terrified of her. Suddenly, all the little things I'd ignored made sense. The way students went silent when she walked by, the way Eli checked his backpack over and over before school, the way he constantly worried about getting blamed for things. These children weren't learning discipline, they were learning fear. Around noon, I got another message from the same teacher who sent the second photo. This time, she asked if we could talk privately. We met at a small coffee shop across town. She looked nervous the entire time, constantly checking the windows like she was afraid someone from the district would see her. That's when she told me the part that made my blood run cold. Teachers had complained about Mrs. Hargrove before, repeatedly. Some staff members begged administrators to stop the public punishments because students were becoming anxious and withdrawn. But district officials ignored it. Why? Because suspension numbers had dropped dramatically under Hargrove's leadership. The school board cared more about statistics than what was happening to actual children. This wasn't just one cruel principal anymore. Adults protected her because the numbers looked good on paper. That evening, Eli overheard me talking to a lawyer in the kitchen. He stood quietly near the hallway, clutching his stuffed dinosaur, listening longer than I realized. Then he asked something that completely broke me. Am I still the bad kid at school? I pulled him into my arms, and for the first time since this started, I cried. Not out of anger, out of guilt. Because I sent him into a place I thought was safe. The next morning, my phone would not stop ringing. News reporters, parents, attorneys, and then one final call came through. Linda Hargrove. I answered immediately. For the first time since I met her, the principal sounded scared. The second I answered, I could hear panic in Mrs. Hargrove's voice. Not anger, not authority, panic. She spoke so fast I could barely understand her at first. The district superintendent had launched an emergency investigation overnight after local news stations picked up the story. Parents were demanding answers. School board members were calling each other in damage control mode. Reporters were already outside the school building. And then she said something that made the entire room around me feel silent. There's footage, she admitted. Security cameras from the hallway outside Noah's classroom showed Noah finding the missing money inside his own desk before Eli was ever removed from the cafeteria. Teachers had already been informed the accusation wasn't confirmed, but Mrs. Hargrove punished him anyway. Because in her mind, making an example out of a child mattered more than whether the child was innocent. The more she talked, the worse it got. She believed public shame corrected behavior faster. Administrators knew she used humiliation tactics. Some even privately supported them because behavior reports improved and suspension numbers dropped. As long as the school looked orderly from the outside, nobody wanted to challenge her methods. Then her voice cracked. Please don't release anything else publicly, she said. This has already gone too far. I remember gripping my phone so tightly, my hand hurt. Across the room, Eli was curled up on the couch under a blanket, watching cartoons, unusually quiet for a kid who normally narrated every scene out loud. And all I could picture was my little boy standing alone in that cafeteria while adults watched him cry. So I told her the truth. You taught children that humiliation is leadership, I said. Now people finally get to see what you've been doing. By that afternoon, the story exploded beyond our town. Former students started coming forward online describing years of fear and public embarrassment under Mrs. Hargrove. Parents admitted they stayed silent because they worried their kids would become targets next. Even teachers began anonymously sharing complaints they'd filed that were ignored by administrators. Within 48 hours, Mrs. Hargrove was placed on administrative leave. The superintendent gave a public apology that honestly sounded more frightened than sincere. The district faced legal complaints from multiple families, and emergency school board meetings turned chaotic, with furious parents demanding resignations. But none of that fixed Eli. For almost a week, he refused to take off his hoodie when he left the house because he thought people were staring at him. He asked me if kids online would always remember him as the thief. Once I caught him tearing up a cardboard cereal box into tiny pieces and hiding them in the trash. That nearly destroyed me. Slowly, though, things started changing. Parents reached out with support. A few students apologized directly to Eli. One little boy even admitted he laughed in the cafeteria because he was scared Mrs. Hargrove would embarrass him next if he didn't. By the end of the semester, I transferred Eli to another school. On his first day there, the principal greeted him personally at the front office and walked him to class herself. No speeches, no warnings, just kindness. A few months later, I sat in the back of his new classroom while he gave a presentation about planets and black holes. He was nervous at first, but halfway through, he smiled again. A real smile. The kind I hadn't seen since before all of this happened. And sitting there watching him, I kept thinking about that cafeteria photo. Mrs. Hargrove wanted one frightened little boy to become an example. Instead, she became one herself.
I still think about how one adult's decision changed the way my son look at school, and honestly, how many other kids stay quiet because nobody believes them first.